out of this webinar today, talking about data, a very important piece to the work that you do with foster youth. So let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. So for those of you that are logging in, you can also do this through your phone. So the call-in number is here on your screen, and the access code is listed there. Of course, you have a chat on the right side of your screen, the GoToWebinar control panel, and you are always welcome to submit live questions. You just click on the questions icon. It'll click on a drop-down menu, type your question, and then click send. And I will be monitoring questions as the webinar goes. We will have time for question and answer at the end. So if you're not getting any responses now, I will go through those at the end. But if you have any logistical questions about I can't hear you or whatnot, go ahead and send those now and I'll respond. All presentation materials and audio will be posted at our California College Pathways website. That's www.cacollegepathways.org. And we will also be providing the complete list of milestone and momentum points to everyone on this webinar today that will be talked about in a little bit. Next slide, please. Our presenters today, we have a great group of people. Debbie Rauscher, Project Director of California College Pathways, John Burton Foundation. Chris Homer from the Career Ladders Project, Caston LaChance and Terrence Willett from Cabrillo College, Ken Story and Samantha Corbin from Education Results Partnership. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Debbie.
Great, thank you so much, Devin, and welcome everybody to this morning's web seminar. So I'm going to quickly go over the agenda for this morning's call. We're going to start by just quickly reviewing the California College Pathways Common Agenda and Strategic Framework. We're going to talk a little bit about why data collection is so important, go through what the key milestone and momentum points are, talk about the new CalPASS Plus system, and then get into a discussion about how you get to the very best data possible at both the community college and four-year institutions. And one thing that I do want to note is that there's a lot of overlap in what we're going to be talking about between the tips for community colleges and the tips for four-year institutions. And actually, when we get to the four-year institutions piece, we're going to be referencing back to a lot of what's already been discussed at the community college level. So if you're on this call and you're with a four-year institution, a CSU or a UC, don't tune out during the community college piece, because actually a lot of that information is going to be relevant to you, and we'll be referencing back rather than repeating it all. So make sure you're tuning in for the whole conversation this morning. So the California College Pathways Common Agenda, the goal of the project broadly is to support foster youth to achieve these four essential and important milestones: equipping foster youth with essential resources, enrolling them in college or training programs, assisting them to earn degrees and certificates, and then ensuring that they're able to successfully embark on a career. The work of California College Pathways is really guided by a couple of big picture central goals. The first goal that's been set for the project is that by 2018, 1,000 foster youth in California will earn a college degree or certificate. And then also that by 2018, foster youth are achieving important educational milestones at rates equal to or better than the general student population. And what those specific milestones are that we're referring to is going to be talked about in much greater detail later on in this morning's web seminar. So how are we going about that? Well, we have a sort of broad strategic framework that really guides all of the work of California College Pathways. The 5 strategy areas are working to expand college and career pathways, so really building strong campus and community networks, strengthening campus and community capacity, so providing resources that increase knowledge and capacity to support foster youth, such as this web seminar, promote data-informed decision-making, obviously another one that's very much linked to this morning's topic. So really wanting to develop an effective shared measurement system that empowers everybody to make informed decisions about policies, practices, and programs. Work to build public will, engaging the community at large to increase awareness of this issue and really foster a culture of cohesion, mobilizing public will on this issue. And then engaging the expertise of foster youth and creating opportunities for foster youth to really inform, lead, and advise on the strategy for how we're moving forward with this work. So I want to start by just talking, before we really get into the nuts and bolts, about the role of data and why are we holding this web seminar? Why do we think that having effective systems of data collection is important? So there's a number of different aspects to data collection that can really benefit the work that all of us are trying to do to support foster youth to be successful in college and career. The first is just identifying areas of immediate need for foster youth. So looking at the data can give us a lot of information. If we look at data and see that only 30% of foster youth are receiving financial aid, then that tells us that this is a key area that we need to address in order to get that number up. Or if we see that foster youth who place into remedial math are dropping out of school at much higher rates, then we know this is an issue that we need to take a look at and figure out what's going on and how to address it. It can help us to track the effectiveness of programs. So ultimately, we all want our work to be effective. That's why we're doing it. We want the work that we do to have real concrete benefits for foster youth. And so having data allows us to do some measurement and analysis and tweak the work as we're going along to make sure that we're being as effective as we possibly can. Informing program design and implementation. So going back to sort of the example I gave a minute ago, if we see that youth are not accessing financial aid, then we know that we need to strengthen support for youth in completing the FAFSA, or we need to sort of identify what exactly are the barriers and how can we design programs that really will impact those issues that are identified. It allows us to identify best practices that others can learn from. So it really gives us an opportunity by knowing what's working well, we're able to disseminate those practices more statewide and try to get the most effective practices out there into the community at large. And we can always be doing things better. I mean, there's just always opportunities to examine what we're doing, take a step back, look at it, see what other folks are doing, learn from each other, and data is a really valuable tool in helping us to do that. It helps us in supporting requests for funding for your program. So many funders are now actually requiring data in order to be considered for funding. So in some cases, it's just a baseline requirement. If you don't have the data, then you're not going to be able to access the funding. And even if you're working with funders who don't have this, being able to provide this kind of data helps you to make a much stronger case for your program. If you can show the ways in which your program is effective in a very tangible and quantifiable way, that makes a very strong case when you're looking for support for your program. And not just with private funders, but also within your own campus community as well. And finally, data is a huge tool in making the case for better policy. So we at the John Burton Foundation do a lot of work in this arena, trying to pass legislation and working with regulatory processes and implementation in order to create better policies to help support foster youth. And when we have data available at our fingertips to point to, it helps enormously in order to make that case. If we don't have any data, we're just basing things on our gut feeling or anecdotal evidence, those arguments are becoming less and less effective with people like legislatures. And so having data available is really essential if we want to actually shift the policy environment. So getting into the nuts and bolts, the first question we need to answer with data is, who are we collecting data on exactly? So there's a couple of different subsets of folks that you can collect data on. We recommend collecting data on at least 2 different categories. And for those of you on this call who are going to be or already receiving funding through the California College Pathways Funder Collaborative, you've probably already had conversations with the funders about what the data requirements are. And so what we're talking about here today, not just on this slide, but this whole webinar, is directly related to what those very specific requirements are. But this goes beyond just those who are receiving funding. These are, some ideas about data collection for all campuses, whether or not you're required to report this data to funders or not, because as we talked about just a minute on the last slide, there's a lot of uses for data beyond just providing it to funders. It can really inform the way that you are delivering your services and designing your program. So the question of who, one data set is all foster youth. So pulling the various data points that we're going to be talking about shortly for anybody who is identified as a foster youth on your campus. And then there's a subset of that which are program participants. So for those campuses that do have a formalized foster youth support program, such as a Guardian Scholars or Renaissance Scholars type program, being able to track data specifically for those participants can also be really valuable. There's a third subset as well, which you may want to consider collecting data on, which is those who are eligible for your program. So, for example, you have all foster youth, which may be anybody who touched the foster care system at any point. And then within that, you have defined for your program that in order to receive services for your Guardian Scholars program, you have to meet the safety requirements. So you have to have been in foster care after the age of 16, for example. And then of those folks, not everybody is going to access your program. You've got a subset of folks that meet that eligibility requirements, and then a subset of that who actually participate in the program. So tracking that entire population that is identical to your population in terms of that basic eligibility can also be a valuable data set to track for comparison purposes. And so with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Samantha. Samantha, are you on the line?
There we go. Can you hear me? I was speaking to you, but I don't think you heard me. Thank you, Debbie. As Debbie mentioned, the milestone and momentum points were really developed by sort of a group of the funders, of advocates, really an attempt to get a number of people involved so that we're able to establish finally and for once a baseline of data. As much as we can do all of these amazing things, as Debbie mentioned, with data, unfortunately, efforts to collect it have not only been inconsistent, but different data points generally are collected among different projects. And through these shared milestone and momentum points, we hope to be able to actually draw some comparisons between programs, identify folks that are really able to achieve some high outcomes for foster youth, and just promote collaboration across the networks in a much more efficient way. This is a living document, so when you do receive the milestone and momentum points, just remember that this is something we expect to evolve over time, and we definitely do want your feedback, not just in the usability of transferring the information, but also in terms of the value of that information to you, and possibly even points that we might have missed that you think are valuable for inclusion in the future. Do you want to go to the next slide, Debbie? So what we've done here is really pulled a condensed version of the document that you're going to see later. We'll do a little pop-up in a second of the momentum points, but for now, each of these slides really just touches on the milestones associated with each of the sort of major cornerstones of the program. So for here, we're looking at different measures of how equipped students are to succeed in college. So if you look on the left side, you'll see that we've sort of chunked out 3 different buckets: college preparedness, financial aid, and support services. And so the milestones, which really represent a key achievement in these areas, those are listed beside them. So for example, percent and number of unduplicated students' first college course attempted in math, English, or ESL was below transfer level or remedial level is one example of a milestone. And then the data source, where we believe you can actually get that information, is listed beside it. Debbie, do you want to go ahead and pop up the momentum point? Perfect. So there's quite a few more momentum points. Not all of them are mandatory for you to report. What we wanted to do was give some flexibility for momentum points. And those momentum points are intended to sort of represent a trajectory moving toward the milestone. So how do we know kids are on track to be college prepared? How do we know they're on track to receive financial aid? How do we know that they're on track to effectively utilize support services? And so we have that in mind as we crafted the momentum points. And again, there's some flexibility for you in terms of deciding which momentum points are applicable to your program, can you collect data on, and do you think will most inform your progress towards achieving those milestones. Next slide. Here we've got examples of the milestones from the enroll portion of this chevron. So again, on the left side, the measure here is simply just enrollment, but the percent and number of students enrolled within one calendar year at one or more community colleges is an example of a milestone. And similarly, the percent and number of students enrolled within one calendar year, that is, of their application at CSU or UC. And so that's a much smaller piece of the chevron, but still very important to make sure that kids are moving from the application process to enrollment, and then finally are able to actually attend. Debbie, do you want to move to next slide? Perfect. So some momentum point examples of students that would be appropriately prepared to enroll, those who utilize priority registration, for example, or perhaps those that are participating in a variety of support programs or other financial aid programs that would support the enrollment process. Next slide. All right. This is the earn portion of our chevron. Again, a little bit larger, and as you can see on the left, broken down into 3 different sections. So how do we know that students are on the way toward earning a degree or a certificate? And given the different folks in the network and sort of the different trajectory that many students might be on, that could be earning a certificate in a career technical ed program. That could be completing an AA degree. Maybe their eventual goal is to transfer or to achieve a 4-year diploma at a CSU or UC. But what we wanted to do here was give a full range of options that would help us determine that students are actually making progress towards one of these goals. Again, recognizing that students will all have goals at different levels. So for example, the first milestone under completion, percent number of first-time students from a cohort. So we're talking about first-time students in college from one cohort, meaning a group of foster youth in a program area in one academic year, who attend a 2-year institution, complete an AA or AS certificate, transfer to a 4-year, or become transfer prepared to move on to a CSU or UC within a 6-year window. So again, we've given a lot of flexibility in terms of what that growth and progress means and where those goals should eventually be, but want to start tracking those and see how our students are moving forward. Next slide. Perfect. So again, some momentum point examples. How do we know students are on their way to moving, transferring, completing a 4-year degree? And so these are, again, some options that we've provided in terms of momentum points. Will be the more comprehensive list that you'll receive later. Percent number of degree transfer seeking students who enroll in 3 consecutive primary terms. That, for example, is an indicator of persistence. For a student that's consecutively enrolled in 3 terms, we know that that student is at least moving forward without breaks in their education towards completing one of these major milestones. Next slide. And then our fourth, the tail end of the chevron, embark. How do we know that our students are actually successful once they've completed perhaps a degree program or even a certificate program? How do we know that our foster youth are leaving better than they came in? And so this section seeks to identify some life and employment outcomes. So percent number of students from a cohort who are employed within 1 and 3 years of either completing or leaving an institution. We know sometimes students complete specific class sets and perhaps not an entire program, but they're definitely still of value toward their education and their employment. So just an attempt to track some of those outcomes as well. Next slide. Perfect. And again, some momentum point examples that we think might represent a trajectory, towards achieving that milestone. Percent number of students in default on student loans, for example. Student loan default tends to be a good proxy for employment outcomes, as in if students are able to pay their student loans upon graduating, those students tend to obviously be performing a little bit better in terms of employment in finances. Next slide. I think that might be it for me, though.
Okay, so this is Ken. I'm going to talk a little bit about CalPASS Plus and how we are trying to make the multitudes of data sources that we have available to folks in a very actionable way and understandable way. And as I walk through this, I'll kind of show you some of the different ways that we think about data and try to present it back to those that use our system, and that these different ways can be applicable towards looking at specific populations like foster youth. These will be sort of more generic versions of it. So those of you that are not familiar with CalPASS Plus, we're a system of data that really is the only one in the state that can connect intersegmentally through K-12 onto community college, universities, and increasingly onto the workplace. And so member institutions all over the state participate by submitting data and have agreements to share their information among the different segments. And it's a completely free system that is a partnership between the Chancellor's Office, San Joaquin Delta College, San Joaquin County Office of Ed, and our nonprofit called Educational Results Partnership. So we think about data really across the pipeline of the educational process onto the labor market. And this is a pipeline that we've developed that has key metrics under each one of these sections that are really the sort of the main milestones that we need to hit as we help students be successful in college and the workplace. Next slide, whoops. So I'm just going to give you some examples of how we think about the data and the milestones. These really our goal with CalPASS Plus is to really try to help illuminate through actionable data and start to provide ways for folks to collaborate around three big issues. One is our students really ready for college and to the extent to careers as well as they come out of our K-12 systems? What does that mean? What does the North Star need to look like for what we expect of students, and particularly increasingly for foster youth, and are they ready to really enter college to be successful? How do we start to unpack how students are placed into different courses, and both it's a combination of are there many multiple measures of ways we can assess student readiness in addition to just one test, and combine that with whether they're prepared coming out of K-12, and then what are the support services needed to help to increase completion within a reasonable amount of time. And then the third big idea is whether students are actually getting degrees or certificates in the fields for which there are jobs. So how do we align better with the labor market so that students are ultimately employable in career ladder type occupations as they leave our community colleges or four-year universities. Next slide. So this is a picture from our website, newly launched, and just a couple of exemplars from the pipeline and how we're thinking about data. So I just expanded the elementary section. You can see that there's some key metrics there, things like are students reading by 3rd grade, are students proficient in math and science, are they becoming college ready? And the way this system works is you select a region, being sort of an economic region, or within a county. And we've tried to sort of aggregate the data so it's really getting at this labor market alignment piece as much as it's also sort of helping to not make the data too threatening. So we're not highlighting an individual institution, but just looking at this from a community standpoint. How do we get better at improving outcomes for students? So in the next slide, I'll show you an example of college readiness from elementary school. So I won't get into the methodology of this. We can get into it later if there are questions. But basically what we're able to do is backward map throughout our K-12 system for any school and show from students that were actually college ready based on, in this particular case, the ACT, but it can be any measure of college readiness. What percent in the first column were proficient on our state exam, so students that are at grade level by 5th grade, and this is a combined math and language arts. And then the next bar are the students who have a high likelihood of actually being college ready by the time they graduate. So this is a 5th grade exemplar projecting out what we'd expect to happen. And so it's pretty eye-opening to see where we are in a state in terms of what we expect of students, where we're setting the bar in terms of proficiency, and how that's actually still low for when they actually graduate and what we need to expect of students being academically prepared for college. With all these bars, you see that we list top 10 within the state and top 10 within a region, and these are all clickable, so you can actually get a list of who's out there that's actually getting more students to be college ready, breaking it down by demographics, looking at finding where there are high challenge populations that are getting better results, and the idea is to create collaboration among educators about what's working and how can we learn from each other. So next slide. So just an example from the community college chevron. So we have a number of metrics here about first-time students entering into remedial. These are sort of, a lot of these mirror what we've outlined in the milestones. Also percent that are earning degree transfer certificate within 6 years. So if you go to the next slide, this is an example of in the LA region, so including a number of community colleges in the Los Angeles economic region, what percent of students are entering college as a first-time student and having to take below college level math at any level. And so you can see that the numbers are pretty stark, and in urban environments this is fairly representative. You can see that in 2012, 86% of the students entered and had to take a remedial math course as they came into the community colleges. The numbers at CSU, are lower, but not significantly better. They're somewhere around 55%. State average is the second bar, and then the third bar again is the top 10 colleges within a region. You can find out who has a better success with their pipeline of getting students into college level courses. Okay, next slide. This is an example of looking at percent of earning degree, transfer, or certificate in 6 years within the East Bay region. So first-time students, this doesn't break it out by whether they were remedial or not. The numbers for students who enter in remedial courses are quite a bit less impressive. This is 54% of the students are completing their goal within 6 years, and top 10 average is about 62%. So fairly representative of what's happening across the state, as you can see by the state average in the middle. Okay, and so these are all, these are examples of overall student populations, but we can do the same thing by breaking this out for foster youth specifically compared to the entire population. All right, next slide. Now, there's different ways that we're trying to provide dashboards, and I'll talk a little bit about our plans for doing something similar for foster youth in a data dashboard that can give you these metrics sort of in one place. This is an example of something we've done with the Chancellor's Office and practitioners around the state around career technical education programs. And the idea was could we work with folks in the field to identify milestones and momentum points, much like we've talked about with foster youth, around CTE programs, and figure out, where there are trends that are positive or not in relation to moving students through a CTE pathway. So the idea is, if they're in a CTE pathway in high school, are they articulating to the colleges and universities? What are the enrollments in a particular program? This example is from a sample college for a nursing program. And you can look at how many students are enrolled, what the 5-year trend is, are we up or down in terms of enrollment. And as you go all the way down to the bottom, we can link it up with what's the labor market demand. So what are the trends for projected employment opportunities within that field, within an economic region? And are we on track in terms of our enrollments? If they're decreasing and the labor market demand is up, we're sort of missing the boat within that program and we might need to adjust. So each one of these you can expand out. So the milestones here are very similar to what we shared before: course completion rates, success rates, GPA, whether students are attaining a particular number of units within a program, so indicating that they're staying within the program, retention rates, et cetera. And each one of these can be expanded out to get demographics and other details of the students who are actually in the program. Credentials are they actually getting their certificate or degrees, and which kinds? Employment is, are they actually being employed within the field? And we have a number of different indicators for that. So that's kind of the launch board, and I think it's instructive in terms of what we're thinking about for how we can provide data back to grantees around foster youth, so we can sort of use a filter of these kinds of metrics with foster youth and see how they're faring across these different metrics. We do many other things with data in terms of looking at transitions of students from high school to community college and four-year universities, but these are just a few examples of how we're thinking about data. So next slide, Debbie. Okay, so where are we headed with this? So we've been working with the various funders and practitioners around helping to build the milestones and momentum points. Our ultimate goal is to create a pilot of a dashboard for foster youth that is a much easier way for everybody to not only get at some of these milestones and momentum points in a very easy way, but also to start to benchmark and see where there are bright spots within different areas, different colleges, different networks, and getting better success for foster youth. So we're starting with 3 geographic regions where there might be successful collaboration, particularly about getting better and more accurate data on foster youth. So those examples might be where there's a strong partnership among the community colleges, the county offices of education and social services, and having some pilots around whether there's good data sharing among those different agencies to really help to better flag and be more accurate with foster youth. So we'll develop a prototype dashboard much like the launch board I showed you before that organizes the milestones and momentum points, and really try to make the data as actionable as possible so that we can make better informed decisions related to program development and supporting students. So 2 things that we'll do in the very short term around this dashboard project is we're working on a report that won't be a dashboard per se, but at least be a way that you can download some data from the CalPASS Plus system on foster youth. And many of you are probably familiar, we recently have been successful in getting a data flag, at least in the community college system, for foster youth. It's still a work in progress, but it's pretty good to this point. So we're able to, because we have all of the community college data, we're able to pull out a lot of these indicators for foster youth as a baseline. So that's, that will be ready and available, we're hoping, by about the 29th of this month. I know you all have a deadline to try to provide some data back to your funders. So the idea would be to get that as many of the milestones as we possibly can out of what the data we have, and provide that back where you can just request a report and we can send you over a file with a number of these data points populated for you. We'll also be sending out a guide that is a pretty detailed explanation of all of the different milestones and momentum points, how you might go about getting those data, definitions for the different terminology that's used, and we hope to get that out to everybody by the end of next week. So it'll give you a good feel for whether or not you can get it from CalPASS Plus or whether you need to work with your IR departments that'll be talked about a little bit later. But that guide should give you a pretty good feel for all the different data points that we're talking about. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to, I believe, Chris, is that right, Debbie?
Yes, Chris, you're up.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Thanks for including us. I'm Chris Palmer from the Career Ladders Project. And first, I just want to say these data tools, Ken, that you've presented, Ken and Samantha, I think they're going to be extremely helpful to colleges in the state and many other users as well to better, to get us a better sense of what's happening with foster youth and really being able to better serve them, reach foster youth, and advocate for their interests alongside the foster youth. I'm going to focus. I'm going to kind of drill down on a piece of what Ken said about this flagging issue. Really, these tools, the degree to which they're going to be most useful depends a lot on whether the colleges are accurately identifying and flagging the youth locally in their college systems, so that then when it gets rolled up and sent to CalPASS, that the data are of high quality and are accurate. So we at Career Ladders Project have been working over the last 5 years with about 20 different colleges in a community of practice, and mainly with counselors, faculty, program administrators, to lift up the practices that are working, that they're in their services to foster youth. And we've found that one of the biggest issues that that people wanted to work on and improve on in their local systems, their local programs, is to get better quality data and to better be able to find out what's going on and answer questions like, how many are we really serving here? How many foster youth do we actually have on our campus? We know that there's maybe 25 that have come to our doors and signed up for a program and that we're working with. But really, what's the bigger universe of colleges working on our campus, going to school on our campuses, and then how are they doing? Where are the loss points? Where are we losing them? These questions come up again and again as a barrier to doing our best work. So the goals really that we see, and I think this is in alignment with all of the work we're doing with this partnership, is to better reach, serve, and advocate for the youth. So what I'll talk about next is, one, how these colleges that we're working with, the 20 colleges, have been identifying and verifying foster youth. Two, how the flagging is going and how that process works. And three, a bit more about a best practice going on at Cabrillo College. But first, I just want to introduce, also we have on our the call with us, Catherine LaChance from Cabrillo College. Are you there, Catherine?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi.
So Catherine is dedicated to serving foster youth on her campus. She is a dynamo that is making a huge difference in their lives there. And I think it would help us to give us some framing here, Catherine. Can you give us a sense of how data is helping you work with foster youth at Cabrillo?
Sure. I think, Chris, what I'm going to do is just kind of tell a story of how I use the data. And I use data for, practical uses for program development, for case management, for recruitment, student retention, information, like classes attempted and classes completed. And last semester, I was reviewing my students' educational plans and became interested in how my students were doing as a cohort in math coursework. And I decided to run some of the data reports I have access to through our Sophia database. And the data reports revealed that my students were doing well in most math classes, except in high-level math, where the completion rate was actually 0. This did not make any sense to me because the student I had in my program who was taking the very high-level math course was an exceptional student who was carrying a 3.5 GPA and very excited about transfer to four-year college as an engineering student. So with further evaluation of the data, I was able to identify that it was indeed my engineer student that I was looking at that was not passing the classes. And I noticed also that there was a pattern of the student dropping high-level academic courses always in the month of November each fall semester. And he was doing well so it didn't make sense. And the data also reflected he was successfully completing various, complex academic coursework in spring semester and completing them with A's and finishing throughout the spring semesters. So again, confusing information. So through a case management meeting with the students and the use of the data reports and information, I was able to intervene and help the student identify why he was dropping courses every fall semester around the same time, and help him with the appropriate resources needed to continue on a successful educational track. So my point is that the data we collect provides me with statistical analysis of our students in our programs, and also gives me the technical tools I need to provide needed resources for our students to help them stay in school and ultimately become, self-sufficient. And just a kind of a sweet side note, my student being an engineering major, when I was speaking with him, he loved the data reports and thought it was very cool that I had taken the time to map him out on a piece of paper. And so, again, the data reports for me were a means of communication that allowed the student to feel safe to share some personal issues that were uncomfortable for him to talk about, as well as a retention tool to help the student stay in school and be successful. So it was quite helpful.
Thank you, Catherine. I think that that's one example of how practitioners at the college level can work with students and intervene. And then there's so many other uses to be able to, see what's happening over time. And that's something that you'll be able to use the CalPASS reports for. And then there's also a need sometimes to, in the middle of the semester to get with to be able to look into your data systems or get with your researcher to see what's happening as well. A lot of that just will depend on the capacity that you have locally. So go to the next slide, please, Debbie. I want to first, I think when I saw the sign up for this webinar, it seemed like there were a number of people outside the community college system. So I just want to back up for a minute and make a few points about how the California Community College system data is set up. Each campus has an independent system, and all of those individual systems, each campus does have their independent system. Sometimes it's housed at the district, so sometimes it's the district might have between 2 and 9 other colleges that are where they roll up their data and then report it to MIS. But in a sense, every campus has their own distinct data set that they upload to MIS, and then the MIS data is uploaded to CalPASS Plus. So CalPASS Plus really has the entire data set from the community college system. It's a exact mirror of what we have. So they're really in a good position to be able to help us report back what's going on. And recently, as has been mentioned, there was a new field added in our MIS system specifically about foster youth. There's also a question, as we'll say more about, on the application. So there are places now to check, as long as there's knowledge on the campus about who the foster youth are, and there's a whole chain of communication that can get that box checked. We have a way of identifying foster youth. Next slide, please. So you'll hear this over and over again, that this part of the presentation is really a call to action about getting to the flag, getting to that part, getting to the place where we've really counted every single one of the foster youth that want to be identified, to count all of them so we can best serve them and understand what's going on. We understand from the Chancellor's Office that right now, given that this new checkbox this new flag that there's a huge undercount, that the colleges aren't quite up to, we expect that on many of the colleges, when we look at the numbers, there's an undercount. So there's really a need for people to get involved locally to make sure that this data is getting collected and flagged. Next slide, please. So here's some ways, among the colleges that we're working with in the community of practice, the 20 colleges, here's the ways 100% of those colleges say that they're using the FAFSA application and the Chafee grant roster to identify foster youth on their campus. About 90% are using this improved question on the CCC Apply, which is the application for college in the community college system, and about 80% are referring to their priority registration list. So these are some of the most prevalent ways of, next slide please, these are among the most prevalent ways of putting this puzzle together of identifying foster youth on your campus. Next slide please. And then about 10 to 50% of the colleges are using other means as well to identify youth and make sure they're counting everyone, since some students don't fill out the FAFSA or don't always get all their paperwork together so that they qualify for Chafee grants and that kind of thing. So there's first-year experience programs where where the folks that are doing that program become aware that there's foster youth that they're serving. There's same thing goes for EOP&S, all kinds of other student services on campuses. There's the peer-to-peer outreach, obviously. There's one of the colleges in the community of practice that every day that the college campus is open, they have former foster youth students that sit on the main square of the campus at a table with information for foster youth, and foster youth can, they hear about that and they can come and sign up for various things and be identified. And that's been a very effective means of reaching out and making students feel welcome too on campus and feeling like they have a connection. Next slide, please. So the other piece of the puzzle here is being able to verify the youth. Colleges have taken different approaches to this. Most are using the self-declaration on the college application, which is the student self-verifying. But of course, for the FAFSA and Chafee, those are verified through a county ward of court letter and other kinds of very, well, it takes quite a bit of legwork oftentimes for the student to put that information together. Cabrillo is working on getting a connection with the county for verification, which they may comment on when they're going to be giving you a little information on their system. And there's other kinds of, Los Medanos College also has a direct connection where they share a list with their county, and they're able to verify that way. Okay, the next slide, please. And one of the other findings we had with the colleges was that they often see that there's not, in order to get the most accurate list and to get the most accurate flagging, they need to cross-check against these different lists of youth, because they'll find that they're on one list and they're not on another, and they could be qualified for something and then they're not. Skyline and Cabrillo in particular do manual cross-checking of internal reports across lots of different sources of information. So next slide, please. So in summary of this part there's really many options for you in getting access to data. One is this customized, you could get a customized report from your internal research, your institutional research department, using the foster youth checkbox or other kinds of program designations. And this great leap now that we'll have in capacity in the state is to have the foster youth report from CalPASS Plus. And they're also, maybe mentioning this later, that they're also able to do a base report on an uploaded list of student IDs. So if you have a list of students you have in a certain program in your foster youth, they're able to generate that list for you. If you're, especially when many research departments are swamped, especially when they're at the district, if you need information fairly quickly, it may not be prioritized. So it will be a great leap for us to have CalPASS be able to provide that service. So now we want to give you a little taste of what one college is doing to better serve foster youth with data with Cabrillo College. And we have Terrence Willett along with Catherine LaChance from Cabrillo to say, next slide please, to show some, showcase what they're doing.
Hi, thanks Chris. This is Terrence from Cabrillo. And we have been fortunate enough that the timing of the beginning of our Foster Youth Project happened to coincide with a large-scale campus effort we've been doing to bring in a SQL data warehouse onto campus to improve our reporting capability. And one of the key ways that users interface with the SQL data warehouse is a system we call SOFIA, Student Outcomes for Faculty Inquiry and Analysis, a web-based reporting tool that faculty and other college personnel can access to readily interact with data on student success, retention, and progression. It was a project that's been a joint IT research project involving folks from Cabrillo, of course, West Valley Mission, and also the Chancellor's Office. One of their programmers helped out, so that it has some similarities in functionality to the Chancellor's Office Data Mart. And in addition to this web-based reporting tool, that includes a flag for foster youth to track outcomes for those students and other special populations. We also, with the SQL data warehouse backend, we're able to use SQL reporting services to also create customized reports to help folks like Catherine be able to track outcomes for her students in a way that wasn't already programmed into the SOFIA interface. If we go to the next slide, I'll just show you an example of what the SOFIA interface looks like. And here we see it has a similar look and feel to the Chancellor's Office Data Mart, which I encourage everyone to visit if they haven't already. This particular example we're showing, it's tracking a cohort of foster youth students for a year and seeing how many of them completed degree or transfer level math or English within that time frame, took a CTE course, earned a certificate, 30 or more units, earned an associate's degree, became transfer directed or transfer ready or transferred. This is a fairly short time frame because we've only got the foster youth flagged back to fall 2012 in the MIS data, so you don't see a lot of outcomes here. But you can see how this type of a reporting tool makes it very easy for Catherine for her to be able to check in whenever she needs to on her students and see how they're doing, and then each additional year she's able to receive updated information. Some of the other queries in the system show student enrollments and success rates within any class of interest, for example, math or English classes or other classes that might be of interest. And one use to which she's been putting that, which has been very helpful for us as the developers of these systems, is she's been able to help validate the accuracy of the data. For example, we had a particular math course where she knew that there was several foster youth students enrolled in the prior semester, but they didn't show up in the system. So the count was lower than she knew it should be, and then we were able to use that information to go back, identify those students, and improve the accuracy of the data and the reporting system. So not every campus is going to be able to develop a local system like this, and that, again, the timing was such that we'd received a grant several years ago to develop the system, and it happened to coincide with the timing of starting up foster youth. And then I'm new to Cabrillo just this last semester, and the foster youth project was a great project for us to use as both for training me on the local data system and then also as a beta test for the system in general. So the timing of everything happened to work out quite well. And so it's always good to check with your local research and IT offices to see what types of reporting tools that they're working on. The tools over the last decade in particular have gotten much more sophisticated and much better, and you may be pleasantly surprised by what your local offices are able to do. That said, there's great variation in capacity issues and capacity at different colleges, and also different projects that they're working on at a particular time. So if they're instituting a major upgrade of, say, a phone system or the web registration or something like that, that might be their focus rather than reporting, like it happens to be more for us at this particular moment. And we can go to the next slide. And so cycling back to the discussion previously about the importance of flagging the students and the different ways of doing that, flagging the foster youth and making sure that those data are getting into MIS, and then reviewing it on a regular basis every semester and ground truthing it against other data sources, particularly your program directors such as Catherine at Cabrillo that I have access to, and other data sources you might be able to obtain from the county or your financial aid applications is very important to do that. We already went over the different sources. Much of the data are self-reported by students. But there in the future may be possibilities of doing data exchanges with the county or other entities that have information to help add to the sources of data and improve the accuracy and quality of the information that you have available for flagging and tracking and reporting. And we can go to the next slide, and I think Chris will be tag teaming on this one.
Yeah, if you could go back, just go back one. Thank you, Terrence.
Sure. You're welcome.
I'm just going to elaborate a little bit on what Terrence was talking about here to just put this challenge out to all of you that are working on community college campuses out there, and ask yourself, do you know where your MIS flag is? Do you know what's happening with it? How is information being relayed to your MIS, to whoever is entering data into MIS at your district or your campus? How is the campus and district coordinating together to be able to get that information in there? So in some places, like at Cabrillo, there is a well-oiled machine where they're in close communication. And I know that we heard from many other colleges where they may have their own list at their program, but they're not sure whether that information is making it to the MIS system and being checked, where that the students are being checked off and flagged in the MIS system. So it's a big step that needs to happen on your campuses, and we really, into the last slide, in conclusion, we encourage you to take action and make sure that that flag gets there and that foster youth are counted, and that we are really able to use this new technology and tools that CalPASS Plus is going to be providing the state to put it to the best use. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much, Chris. So this is Debbie back again from the John Burton Foundation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the CSU and UC data systems and how they are either the same or different than what Chris and the folks from Cabrillo just covered. As a reminder, if you do have questions, feel free to submit them through the Q&A panel, and we'll be doing questions during the last 20 minutes or so of the web seminar this morning. So CSU and UC campuses, every campus is different. They all have their unique systems. Both the CSUs and UCs do have a foster youth designation on their application. One of the key differences between CSU, UCs, and the community colleges is that not all the four-year institutions participate in CalPASS Plus. And so there's actually going to be a slide coming up in a couple of minutes that will list those campuses that do participate in CalPASS Plus, so you'll be able to see if your campus is on that list or not. As it currently stands, even though the CSUs and UCs have a foster youth designation on the application, and most campus-based systems have some sort of foster youth flag within them, that information is not actually included in the upload that goes to CalPASS Plus currently. CalPASS Plus is working on being able to include that in the upload in the future, so stay tuned on that. But for the time being, unfortunately, the four-year institutions can't just pull information directly out of CalPASS Plus based on a foster youth flag in the same way that the community colleges are able to.
Debbie, this is Ken. Just to add a point to that.
Yeah.
It is quite possible if a college, CSU or UC is willing to provide a cohort file of the students they have in their own system that are flagged, we can just match that up. So there is a way to do it. It's just one extra step. So it's not automatic, but it's not insurmountable. So it's something that can be done pretty easily.
Great. Thanks for clarifying that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that actually as well in a couple of minutes. So in terms of how you identify foster youth, this list is going to look really familiar if you're paying attention during the community college section of the presentation. The way that you identify the foster youth is basically the same. So those who self-report on the admission application, those who indicate that they are foster youth on the FAFSA, folks that are deemed eligible for Chafee grants. Some of the EOP programs actually include a question about foster care participation in their application, so that is another source. And as Chris talked about, talking to folks during orientation and first-year experience programs, doing peer-to-peer outreach, word of mouth, and things like tabling in the quad at your campus, and outreach to community partners such as ILP programs, child welfare agencies, transitional housing providers, CASA programs, etc. So again, the idea here, similar to what we've already discussed, is to really cast the net wide and to identify as many foster youth as possible. So to really capture data from a lot of different sources, because you'll see that the folks who show up on these lists can be very different. And so using all of these lists gives you a chance to really capture as many of the foster youth who are on your campus as possible for the purposes of data collection. In terms of your options for obtaining data, so you have a couple of choices. One is working just directly with your campus institutional research department using the foster youth checkbox, and if you have a Guardian Scholars program, there's probably some sort of designation within your campus system as well to indicate somebody is a participant. The other is what Ken just mentioned a minute ago, which is that even though there's not a way to pull data out of CalPASS Plus based on a pre-populated checkbooks, there is this option to pull a report based on a list of student IDs. So this can be really useful if your institutional research department is swamped and doesn't have the time to develop a customized report for you, but they are able to pull a list of foster youth. That's going to be obviously a much easier task for them than designing a whole report. So if they can pull a list and say, here are the people that we show as foster youth, here are their student IDs, then you can actually provide that list in a spreadsheet to CalPASS Plus, and they can pull that data for that particular list. So there's kind of a little extra step there in between, but it does create a way for you to get the information out of CalPASS Plus for those of you for whom that's going to be the best option. One thing I just want to note is make sure that you validate student IDs. Obviously, if you have typos or the information is incorrect, then you're not going to be pulling data on the correct cohort of folks. So as promised a minute ago, here is the list of CSU and UC campuses that participate in CalPASS Plus. So I'll leave it up here for a minute if you want to scan and see if you find your campus on there or not. This tells you whether or not you have access to the data through CalPASS Plus at this time. We are going to be sending out this whole presentation to everybody on the call, so we'll have this list available to you when you receive that via email. One last point I want to make is just on the issue of verification that Chris kind of touched upon during her presentation. So there's a variety of kind of strategies around the extent to which campuses rely on self-report versus having students do that legwork to bring in proof that they were part of the foster care system. And depending on where you land on that, you know, you're either going to be running the risk of overcounting or undercounting, essentially. So if you are not doing verification, then you may overcount because there may be some people who do the checkbox on their application, even though they weren't in the foster care system because they just didn't understand the question or they lived with their grandmother and they thought that they were in foster care, but in fact they weren't. And so you're going to end up with some number of folks who show up on your data list who aren't actually foster youth. On the flip side, if you do verification, then you're very likely to undercount, because not all foster youth are going to go through the process that's necessary to bring in the necessary verification. So our recommendation on this is that you err towards completeness when you define the population for whom you will be pulling data, even if that means that there's some risk that non-foster youth might be included. So we think that in terms of, for this particular issue of pulling data, that you're better off casting the net wide and capturing essentially anybody who might be a foster youth in your data set. Now, of course, this may differ when you're talking about actually for benefits, for obviously financial aid verification or priority registration. You may have different policies, but for the purposes of that checkbox that defines your data set, our recommendation again is that you err on the side of overcounting rather than undercounting, and err on the side of reducing the burden on the youth themselves in order to get you to the data set that you're looking for. Last thing I want to say is about working with your research department. So just some tips coming directly from folks in research departments based on their own experience fielding these requests. And they provided me with kind of the things that they think would be most valuable for folks to keep in mind when making these requests. So connecting early is kind of an obvious one, but just not showing up the day before and saying I have to get this information to my funder tomorrow. Scheduling a meeting with both your IT and research departments well in advance to really hone in on what the best infrastructure is going to be for data tracking. Developing a personal relationship with the folks in those departments, and you can see my little graphic there of a man bringing cookies, which Terrence, who's on the call from Brio, told me that he firmly endorses that strategy. Being well organized in your request, when you show up, really knowing precisely what it is that you're asking for. If you do have challenges with the IR department at your campus, using the administration to help you, using your own chain of command within whatever department you work for to be able to grease those wheels and move things along. And really getting an institutional agreement about how these resources should be allocated, and doing some advocacy work to try to get the needs of the foster youth program given greater priority within all the various things that your research department has on their plate. So finally, this slide here has the information about all of us and how you contact us. So again, we will be sending this out to you, but if you want to make note of anybody's email address, it's available here. A recording of today's web seminar and the materials will be posted to our website. And again, it will also be emailed out to you. Also wanted to give folks a heads up about the second webinar coming up in our series about data, which will be on March 19th. And that webinar is going to be focused on using data. So today's webinar was focused on getting good data, and we're going to be talking in much more detail about once you have that data, what do you do with it? How can you make best use of that information and be most effective? And how can data really enhance your ability to provide services to foster youth? And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Devin, who's going to go through some of the questions that all of you out there have been sending in during the course of this web seminar this morning.
Great. Thank you. Thanks to all of our presenters. It was great information. I hope you guys all got a lot out of it. We got some good questions. The first question here was from the beginning. I'm gonna direct this question to Ken. And it states, I'm curious why you use the calendar year versus the academic year in the data dashboard, which is how campuses operate.
Within, just in terms of the milestones, I assume?
Yes. I believe there was one milestone in particular under enroll. that use a calendar year.
Yeah, that's glad you pointed that out. Our intention was actually academic year, so we'll make that change. That's actually must be just a typo in that one we have. So it should be an academic year for a cohort.
Okay, great. And then the next question was talking about the proficiency level, and this is again to Ken. Was that the proficiency level at basic skills or actually at grade level?
So with the charts I was showing on the K-12 school districts, it's proficiency on the California Standards Test. So it's the main test that's been used over the years about whether students are proficient at a particular subject and grade level. So, there's a transition, obviously, when they come to the colleges where the measurement is different, and it's based upon usually a placement test and perhaps a few other measures for which they decide whether you're college level or basic skills. But in those charts for K-12, it's using what's measured in K-12, and then at the community college, it's measured by where they were placed and which courses they ended up in.
Great, thank you. A couple more for you, Ken. Does CalPASS provide disaggregated information for those in foster care?
Yeah, so I didn't want to get too detailed into CalPASS Plus, but basically, yes, the data can be disaggregated by demographics. What's not done with the CalPASS system is we cannot provide the data back to you by individual student. They are identified as an individual unit with a unique identifier that you can't translate. And that's simply for confidentiality and FERPA reasons. But any background that we have on the students can be disaggregated by other characteristics. And the launch board that I showed, you can do that and open up any of those metrics, and it'll show you male, female, socioeconomic background, ethnicity, et cetera.
Thank you. And what are the 3 geographic regions that you are looking to pilot CalPASS Plus?
You know, it's a work in progress. It's probably a mix of Northern California, Southern California, and sort of Central Valley, but we haven't solidified those yet, so I don't necessarily want to say.
Great. And one more question for you, Ken. How would a campus access the foster youth report through CalPASS? Yeah, so the way our agreements are with the colleges and universities and even K-12 is that there's sort of one main point of contact at the college who can actually download data, and the reason is it's data that's not just their own college, but it's also shared among K-12 and four-year universities. So what we would ask is that we work through our main contact, which is typically the institutional research director, and they would just basically go into our website in a simple web form and just ask for a report on foster youth with these institutions included, and then takes about a day, and then we send them back a note saying you can pick up your file here, and then they can hand that over. So that's just per the request of the colleges, so that a lot of different people aren't asking for data out of the system that may be sensitive. So that's how we would go about it, and we can work with you on how to navigate that, and if we need to talk to the institutional research department for you, that's fine too. Great, thank you. One other question coming from a community-based organization. Ken, I guess you can probably field this one. How can community agencies access this type of information as well? Yeah,
that's a good question. So community-based organizations are not members of CalPASS because it's really just the education institutions. However, if you are in a network with your partners, our idea is that the colleges, universities, K-12 districts would pull their data, and then it's their discretion to share it with their community partners. So if you're in a network where you're all talking about the data, you would have to just get it through your colleges or universities who are members of the CalPASS system.
Perfect. And this is a question for Debbie. How do you communicate between the college and county social services about foster youth status given FERPA protections of privacy?
So FERPA is obviously very complex, and there's different ways that folks have addressed FERPA issues. We actually there's a publication that was put together by the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education, which is a great kind of synopsis of FERPA that if folks are interested, definitely feel free to send me an email. I can forward that to you. And it does talk about how FERPA doesn't actually apply when you are talking about communicating aggregated information. So as long as it's not student-identified information, you're generally okay with FERPA. But that being said, I'm not an attorney, and so folks should certainly do their own analysis of that to get more information.
Great, thank you. And I believe this would be another question for you, Ken. For the university level, is there a way to track data for how many foster youth do not meet all of the A through G requirements but are still admitted to the university under some type of exception or waiver process?
So there is, but with limitations. So CalPASS is not a complete system in so much as we have all the community college data, but we have not an entire set from university and K-12 partners. So we have about 60% of this K-12 districts participating in our system. And so what that means is you're a little bit limited, but if we can find a student, say at a university, through the university saying, here's our list of foster youth students, and we run it through our system, then we can match them up with wherever we have data from a K-12 institution. And so in those cases where we can do that, we can tell you these students did or did not meet A through G, and then whether they show up at the university, and then you could sort of say, okay, well, these are the students that must be had an exemption. We don't have data specifically on what exemption that is, but you could sort of extrapolate it from the total population and which ones that we can find at a G. It's a little bit clunky because you're only going to have a subset of the students who we can find, and then you can analyze that from the ones that group of students who we could actually locate. But we can go backwards in time, in other words.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, that concludes the questions that came in. Unless anyone has a question, ask now, or that's it. Okay, no one's asked. So we are good. Thank you all for joining us today on the webinar. We hope you got as much out of it as we all did learning about data. And again, we will be sending everyone the PowerPoint, the milestone and momentum metrics, and all materials will, of course, be posted on our website. Have a good day, everyone, and take care. Thank you so much.